We interrupt this broadcast in order to bring you a little bit of salacious wine gossip. Quite a few bits, actually. Because every now and then at the Hand Drink Solo Wine Club, we like to indulge in a little bit of Venus scandal. I mean, certified and historically documented, fully verified, of course, but scandalous nevertheless. Here are 4 examples of the wine world's endlessly complicated relationship with integrity. Scandal number 1, and arguably the most sustained scandal of the bunch, takes place in France, where for the better part of an entire century, they would beef up their pale, sometimes insipid wines by pouring in liters and liters of rich, heavy Algerian wine, which means that as late as the 1960s, many a good, hearty Burgundy was not really Burgundy at all. Scandal number 2 came in 1985 when Austria comprehensively detonated their global wine trade by admitting that they had been adding antifreeze into their wines in order to make it a richer, more engaging affair. Of course, antifreeze can also put you into a coma, so there's that. Scandal number 3 occurred when South Africa had its own awkward moment after it was discovered in 2004 that a winemaker from one of South Africa's largest producers had been adding green pepper extract into their Sauvignon Blanc in order to deliver the then ever so fashionable capsicum snap. Of course, this green pepper extract was thoroughly food safe and harmless to humans and celebrated in almost every area of culinary endeavor, but certainly not in wine. For scandal number 4, we move back to the old world, and we're in the Douro Valley in Portugal when early port producers used to have to go picking elderberries in order to add them in to their port blends in order to beef up the color, which could sometimes be a little pale. Now again, elderberries are mostly delicious and certainly not harmful, but regulators eventually had to crack down when the practice became so commonplace that one had to begin asking whether it was really wine at all. But luckily for the Dourans, is that what you call people from Douro, there was a legal solution all along. Viticulturalists from the Douro headed up north to Minho at the very heart of the Vinho Verde region. And there they found a grape called Vinhão, and they brought it back to the Douro because it was known for having incredibly inky color, thick skins, ridiculously high natural acidity. Perfect to provide everything a good port requires. Of course, in typical bizarro old world wine fashion, when they brought it back to the Douro, for no reason at all, they gave it a new name, labeling it Souzao instead of Vinhão, which was perfectly serviceable nomenclature in the first place. Ironically, because the Douro became very famous for producing high-quality wines and Vinho Verde became famous for little more than insipid fizzy wines, Suzao was the name that stuck in global wine consciousness, and Vinhão as a cultivar kind of seemed to disappear. But there's a little twist, because back home in Vinho Verde, Vinhão is slowly creeping its way back into hearts of wine lovers, and red Vinho Verde is experiencing a low-key renaissance. So the grape of Vinhão, which was once seen as a kind of legal workaround in the Douro, is being rediscovered in its home region of Vinho Verde as a rather exciting single cultivar wine. And the relevance of this doesn't end with Portugal, because two of our favorite wine explorers have been visiting Vinho Verde and talking and listening and being inspired by some of those wines. Not least of all, inspired by what this slightly feral, endlessly resilient cultivar of Suzao can do when it's taken seriously. And their little travels are more than just a husband and wife adventure to the old world. Margo is in fact cellar master at Boplaas, and Boplaas is one of the foundational producers and influencers in the realms of Iberian cultivars in South Africa. So when we tell you that today's Hand Drink Solo Curious Wine of the Day is the Fledge & Co. Souzao 2025, this is not some fringe point of interest, but rather an incredibly important piece of evidence in the emergence and the maturity of Iberian cultivars in South Africa. In case it wasn't obvious, today's wine is 100% Souzao, although Leon and Margo would have called it Vinhão if the Wine and Spirits Board would have allowed them to. And it is made with fruit that is all from the Klein Karoo, or more specifically, wine of origin Carlitsdorp. So if I hadn't stated it clearly enough already, when Fledge bottle a Suzao, this is not some sort of Venus Portuguese cosplay. The Klein Karoo as a region has over a century of experience with these Iberian cultivars. According to Leon Coetzee, Souzao or Vignal has been in South Africa for almost 120 years, and cultivars like Touriga Nacional and Tinta Barroca are so deeply woven into the fabric of the Swartland and the Klein Karoo that calling them imports is really just a little bit lazy. And not least of all because Calitzdorp and the Klein Karoo maps really closely onto a climatic outline of the Douro Valley. It's extremely hot, extremely dry, and a river runs through it. And perhaps as the last point on the topic, it should be noted that this region is now 2 generations deep of South African winemakers who have their own personal journey with these Iberian cultivars. Long-time subscribers to the Handrink Solo Wine Club will no doubt have heard me talk about Leon and Margo on many occasions before. And usually I spend a lot of time talking about Leon's endless spirit of adventure and his terroir by truck philosophy, or Bucky as they call them in South Africa. But I don't often talk about Margo as much as I should, and that's my bad. Because not only has Margo been at Boplaas for 20 years, and been the cellar master of one of the most influential estates in the entire region. She also got her MBA while doing her master's in viticulture, because apparently in Calitzdorp, sleep is optional. Also, her CV features back-to-back SA Young Wine Show trophies. It features multiple wins with Tim Atkin and his SA Wine Report. And she's also absolutely no stranger to the Platter 5-star tag. But while awards are nice, what's really important is her influence. And as we mentioned earlier, Boplaas and the Klein Karoo at large are an incredibly influential node that has been digging deep into how to get the best out of Iberian cultivars in South Africa. Margo specifically has been breaking ground not just to produce wines that can perhaps be spritzy and fresh as a young wine, but also taking these cultivars and producing wines that could outlast us all. Okay, so now that we've given you historical context on Suzao and Iberian cultivars in general, and we've also told you about the genius winemaking mind behind the wine, it's time for us to get into the glass and actually see what Margo has prepared for us. Okay, so when we give this guy a sniff, well, the first thing that hits you is a sense of depth, or perhaps a sense of layers, because when you look at the wine, you've got this incredibly inky, almost opaque feel to it, and the visual cue can't help prime your brain to be receiving what feels like it could be just an onslaught of same jammy black fruit. Now, it is true to say that what is there are some delicious black cherry notes, a touch of mulberry, but that's not the end of the story, because what pops out after that is a intensely savory, almost roasted tomato type note. There's some herbal elements. And while the black fruit element is there, it's not flabby. It feels somehow hemmed in by those more savory herbal elements. Now, when we give it a sip, well, I'll tell you this, you can't smell acidity, but when it hits you on the palate, it is one of the most imposing elements to this wine. So one would expect inky, black, ripe fruit, but there is such an incredible wave of pure natural acid from the Suzao that impression of inky black fruit turns into this alive, vibrant, incredibly fresh wine. So the nose may have felt broody, but the wine is fresh and alive. Again, the black fruit is there. There's black cherry, there's mulberry, but it's not like a little plated mulberry compote. It feels like mulberries growing in a wild thicket. Okay, mulberries grow on a tree. Imagine a wild blackberry then. And I guess this is where tasting wines with your eyes closed can get dangerous, because your brain can just tell its own story. But really, let's stick to what's in the glass. Rich black cherry, a kind of wild mulberry blackberry element. That savory roasted tomato weaves in it and stops the fruit at any point from appearing jammy or flabby. And sometimes you might get an experience from like a Zinfandel from Lodi, where the fruit really just goes all over your palate, and it's like a fruit flood. But this is not that. This is surprisingly tightly wound, and I'd say largely because of the natural acidity that comes from the Suzao cultivar. And I guess we've really just been kind of giving it a fruit basket approach. We haven't really talked about structure. But the tannins are really beautifully balanced against the really rather concentrated fruit. And I think if I know Margo's winemaking, this makes total sense, because if you have a cultivar that naturally gives up loads of color and anthocyanins, then you don't have to pummel it. So you end up with a wine that does have plenty of fruit and plenty of mouthfeel, but without heaviness. And put differently, it can have the color and the character, but without the bruising. So that's all we have time for today. But while you pour yourself a second glass, I'm going to leave you links to 2 videos, both of which talk about other wines that Fledge & Co. have made, mostly because these are producers that you really need to get to know better. Because the sooner you do that, the sooner you'll see that their sense of adventure is absolutely insatiable. And honestly, that's the kind of wine journey that's worth following. So until next time, stay curious and always drink niche.